As Emily mentioned, I am a threat intelligence analyst at Splunk. And if you're not familiar, Splunk is a data analytics software provider. So if you work in a security operations center, there's a chance you'll be using Splunk. And my background, though, is not cybersecurity. I actually started off as a journalist. I was a reporter, anchor, producer all over the country. I sort of hopped around from job to job, and then ultimately ended up at Splunk, starting off as a security strategist. So I was hired on a team called Surge, which is a research team working on long-form research projects. I was very lucky to end up on that team. I worked with a lot of really smart people and learned a ton from them. During that time, I also started a podcast. It's called The Security Detail, about the threat landscape in different industries. Each episode is a different industry. So I had a chance to talk with a lot of experts and learn a ton from them as well. And I'm really passionate about careers in cybersecurity, especially coming from a career change point of view, not only because I've gone through it, but because I also want to pass along experience and hope to provide some of that encouragement to anyone who's looking to achieve something similar. So I presented about this at a number of conferences at RSA, WESIS, and I'm super excited to be here with SANS. I think it's great that SANS puts together this summit that's free to attend and virtual, so you don't have to necessarily travel. And I think that's a really great opportunity for a lot of people. So what I'm hoping to cover today is, of course, setting career goals. That's something that I did step number one when I was considering a career change. Mentorship has been a key theme today, so I'll definitely touch on that. Continuous learning is also a given in cybersecurity. I'll talk a little bit about how to be strategic about your job hunt, because if you're just sending out resumes and cold applying, you have a lower likelihood of hearing back. So how to be more strategic about how you approach job descriptions, and then also reaching out to hiring managers. I found a lot of success from that. I also have some advice about the interview process, because that can be a little bit nerve-wracking sometimes as well. And then, of course, resiliency is another big theme of today, approaching this with the understanding that cybersecurity is unfortunately an industry where there aren't a lot of jobs that are labeled entry level, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't apply. So having that mindset of knowing that you might get rejections. I know I did when I was applying for jobs, but it's not unique to you, and you should persevere and continue to apply and not let that deter you, especially if you're passionate about cybersecurity, because I'm telling you, if you are passionate, there's absolutely a place for you in this industry. You just have to stick with it. And then I'll also touch on some of the many career paths within cybersecurity. It's not all encompassing, but just a few that come to mind for anyone who might be considering their options or trying to find out what they're most interested in. So to get started, just a little bit about how all this played out for me. I studied broadcast journalism in college, and my first job out of college was a reporter in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So that's me on the left, right out of college in Fort Wayne. And from there, I anchored a morning show in Palm Springs, California. I ended up in Louisville, Kentucky after that as a producer. And it was around that time, I think it was in 2018, where I started thinking about my next move. I was nearing the end of my contract, and the next logical step in my career would be a newsroom management position. But that I wasn't too excited about that. So I started thinking more broadly about a career change. And I was telling a good friend of mine about this. His name is Joseph Kingstone, and he's a pen tester, so an ethical hacker. He currently works at Black Hills Information Security, which is a great company. And so I was telling him this, and he responded, and it shocked me. He said, "You should work in cybersecurity. You'd be great at it." And I was like, "What? Cybersecurity? This isn't even on my radar." But he kind of explained to me some of the parallels between journalism and cybersecurity. And there are many, especially in the role that I'm in now with threat intelligence. There's a lot of research and writing, communication, right? The ability to share complex technical topics with a wide audience. That's something that journalists also do. They have to distill down information and share it within a time constraint. And so I thought about this and I thought, oh, yeah, there are some similarities, right? And so I'll talk a little bit more about the role that Joseph played for me as a mentor, because I'll tell you this, I would not be here today giving this talk if it wasn't for him and his enthusiasm, because he's also a career changer. So having that motivation, that that extra ens ensuring that I'd be good at this really helped me. And then also providing a roadmap for me to accomplish it. That was huge, because otherwise I think it would have been too daunting for me to even consider. So mentorship, very, very important. So when I applied at Splunk, it was an actually truly entry-level job, which is rare to come across, at least with a job description saying entry level. And so the person who hired me, his name's Ryan Kovar, and on the left here is a post that he put on LinkedIn advertising the job. And he recognized an opportunity to create an entry-level role to bring in people from non-traditional backgrounds, especially in the humanities, because of those communication skills, to work on a research team. And I know there was a talk about certs versus degrees, and no matter who you talk to, you'll get different answers. I'm obviously a fan of certifications because that's the route that I went. But I'll tell you that just learning on the job is by far the best way to learn. If you're able to work with a team that is patient and willing to show you their thought process and how they do things, that's one of the best ways to learn. And so Ryan saw this opportunity. He created this job for someone to learn on the job. And the job posting went viral. Over here on the right, this is a TikTok of this guy here who reviews entry-level InfoSec jobs. And so this one made the list, and it was a very popular job. I think several hundred people applied in the first week, which is not uncommon. You know, there are a lot of people looking to break into the industry, and it's absolutely possible. I'm not saying there aren't enough jobs. You just have to be more strategic, and you also can't be too close-minded to jobs that might seem a little bit out of reach, or that might not, that might list like 3 to 5 years experience. That doesn't necessarily mean you can't apply if you don't have those 3 years. There's still ways to go about it, which I'll get to in a little bit. But anyway, I just wanted to highlight that this was, in fact, a truly entry-level job. And I hope that more companies will see the opportunity with this of creating a job that is marketed as entry-level and that provides on-the-job training. So back to mentorship. This is a photo of Joseph here, my mentor, and a little bit about him. So he actually started out as an Army mechanic. And from there, he started studying about cybersecurity. He worked on an IT help desk, which is a really common path to build up some of those technical skills. He then worked in a SOC for a few years. He worked his way up in a SOC. And from there, he became a pen tester. And that was sort of the niche that he found himself in, what he really enjoyed doing. And so for him, he gave me a bunch of his study guides from when he was first starting out. And so I was just sort of flipping through, seeing if I could even follow what these study guides were saying. And the great thing about Joseph is he's probably helped at least maybe a dozen people at this point land jobs in cybersecurity. So thank goodness for people like him who take the time to encourage, because that's really key with sticking with it and finding that courage to even try. And so that's really the role that he played for me. But this really wasn't an overnight decision for me. This is something that I mulled over for a couple years before making the jump to start applying for jobs. So what I first did is I created a Twitter account back when it was called Twitter. And I basically just followed everyone that Joseph followed and just clicked through, followed all those people. And this was great because I had a chance to see, you know, who are some of the thought leaders in the industry? What are people talking about? I was able to see breaking cybersecurity news as it was happening to keep up with the landscape. And so that was really educational for me. I also started listening to different podcasts. I'm sure many of you have heard of Darknet Diaries. That's a podcast I really like. There's the Cyberwire with Dave Bittner, which is more of a news format, which I really appreciated as a news junkie myself. So that was sort of how my interest began, was just the news angle of cybersecurity. I started following and bookmarking all the cybersecurity news sites, you know, like Cyberscoop or The Record, the Hacker News. Those are all just a few examples of sites that I monitored. And I was still working. I took a job in Denver in a newsroom. And while I was working in that newsroom, I actually started covering a lot of cybersecurity news stories. And I started to really understand the impact that this was having. And for instance, the JBS ransomware attack, when that happened, I wrote a web story about it because JBS was headquartered in Colorado. So I was able to see, ransomware, this is a problem and it's getting worse, and more companies need to be aware of this. And so that really underscored my interest and my passion in cybersecurity. And so that's when I decided to make the leap and start looking at jobs and start pursuing certifications. And so my next piece of advice is to network. And of course, networking has two different meanings, right? We could talk about basic networking concepts, the fundamentals, which I highly recommend starting out with if you're starting from square one like I did. It can be really exciting to just jump ahead and focus on, the exploits and the more attack-focused methodologies and whatnot. But to know any of that, you really have to start with the basics. You have to start from square one, and don't forget about that. That's one piece of advice. But back to networking in terms of meeting people and building connections and the sense of community, there are a number of ways to do this. There's so many different groups and associations that you can join. SANS is great with the summits that they produce throughout the year. There's also B-Sides, which produces local, more regional conferences. And then there's the big annual conferences like Black Hat, RSA, DEF CON. Those are other events that you can travel for. And I actually have a story about this. So when I had created that Twitter account, there was a tech executive that I followed, and she posted that she had a number of passes to Black Hat, a number of free passes for anyone who was looking to break into the industry. And so I actually sent her a message on LinkedIn. I said, hey, I'm a journalist. I'm interested in cybersecurity. Was curious if you had any of those passes. And sure enough, she did. So I ended up with a free pass to Black Hat, which was really cool. Had never been to a cybersecurity conference before, but I remember I went there, I had my resumes with me, and I went around to all the different vendor booths and shook hands, introduced myself, asked if they had any positions open that would be a good fit. So I really put myself out there, and I went to the different networking receptions. I met a lot of really cool people. I even remember I was having one conversation at one of those happy hour events with an executive, and it explained that I was looking to change careers. I was just starting out. And one of the first things he said to me, he said, well, I would never hire you. He was a little dismissive, right? But we continued our conversation, and by the end of it, he was sending an email to some of his colleagues to see if they had any open positions. So I share this because you might encounter people who are skeptical about your decision to change careers, or people who might be a tad bit condescending, or might not believe that you're cut out for this. But don't take it personally, because some people just have a default reaction to that, and it's not at all reflective of your ability to work in this industry. And I stuck around at Black Hat. I stayed for DEF CON, which is more of like an underground hacker type conference that's usually right after Black Hat. And I met a ton of people there too. I made a lot of friendships, people who I still stay in touch with to this day. In fact, I remember I was standing in the merch line at DEF CON, and it's a very long line. It takes forever to get a hoodie if you attend DEF CON. And the person behind me was also a career changer. And so we bonded over that. He was working in the wine industry and was studying for different certifications. So we had a good conversation, and we still talk every now and then. So it's always great to meet people. You never know what connections will lead to future job opportunities. So it's definitely something to consider whenever you have an opportunity to attend a conference or join a group. And then I have some advice just from when I set out to apply to jobs. I was getting a lot of rejections. So I was applying, just cold applying to a bunch of different jobs, sending out my resume, and I didn't know anyone at these companies, and I was getting a lot of rejections, and it was discouraging. But then I started to be a little bit more discerning about my job search. So my number one piece of advice is to apply even if you don't meet all of the requirements. Don't let that deter you. I mentioned this earlier. If you meet some of the requirements, but not all of them, that's okay. Sometimes companies actually mean that these are nice to have, not necessarily hard and fast requirements. So apply anyway, especially if it's a job that excites you. If you feel like you would do good in that position, definitely apply. Don't let that hold you back. And for me, when I was being more discerning about these job postings, I found one in particular that encouraged journalists to apply. And so when I saw that, I was like, oh, this is perfect. This is exactly what I'm looking for. And so I applied, but not only did I just do that, I also reached out to the hiring manager on LinkedIn. And so I recommend people do this because I sent a quick note to him. I said, "Hey, I'm a journalist. I'm studying for these certifications, hoping to break into the industry. I'd love to learn more about what you're looking for in an applicant." And he responded. We had a quick, back and forth. And I think it was maybe a couple days later that I got a rejection email for that job. And I was so sad. I was definitely disappointed because I had gotten my hopes up about that. But the very next day, I got an email from the recruiter who said, "Hey, there's been a mistake. We would like to invite you for an interview." And what had happened was the recruiter had thrown out my resume because it didn't meet the keywords or whatever they were looking for. But then the hiring manager noticed that my name wasn't among that initial batch of interviewees. And so he asked the recruiter to include me. And I actually ended up going through several rounds of interviews and I was a finalist for that position. So I've heard this technique works for people. I wouldn't reach out for every job you apply to, but if there's a job that really stands out to you that you're really excited about, I highly recommend taking that next step of reaching out to a hiring manager, showing your interest, because you never know if that's going to make all the difference with being invited for an interview. And so if you are invited for an interview, it can be nerve-wracking, especially the technical component. That was something that I was nervous about as someone who had never done a technical interview. But I've also had the opportunity since then to sit in on panels for interviews. So I've had a chance to listen to various interviewees. And I can say that coming in and with a calm demeanor and being confident in what you're saying can make a great first impression. People can tell sometimes when you're nervous. So being able to come in with confidence is really huge because first impressions do matter for job interviews. So if this is something you struggle with, which I struggle with, I get nervous all the time. I'm a nervous person. You can reach out to friends, family, set up mock interviews, practice running through some of the questions you might get, and then also come prepared, right? Maybe jot down a list of some questions you have for the interviewer because there's a good chance they're going to ask you, "Do you have any questions for me?" And so I recommend asking, how your success will be measured on the team, what success looks like in that role. You can also ask about personal development opportunities. Does the company offer any sort of education credits or reimbursement for certifications? That's a great question. And I also like to ask, what are some of the greatest challenges facing your team? Because that can be a somewhat revealing question too. You can learn sort of where this team is, what their challenges are, and how they're addressing that. And there's also a good chance you're going to be asked a question about industry news. So I also always recommend brushing up on some of the biggest incidents from the last few weeks, some of the vulnerabilities that have emerged. Just be aware of what's happening in the news because that could inform some of the questions that you're asked. And then also for the technical questions, if you are asked a question and you're not entirely sure how to answer, I have two different strategies that you can use that I've found and that I've asked others in the industry and they agree these are good strategies to use. The first is to show how you would find the answer. And so I actually have an example of this. So when I was applying for the role that I'm in currently, I interviewed with a member of the team. And one of the questions he asked me was, if this tool wasn't available, what tool would you use in its place? And I didn't really know offhand because I was familiar with the tool, but I didn't use it day to day in my current role. So I said, well, what I would do is I would pull up Google and I would search alternatives to X tool. And I literally brought up Google as I was talking to him and searched it. And I found a few alternatives listed. And then I said, well, I would probably send you a Slack and just said, hey, this tool's down. Have you used any of these? What would you recommend? Because that's the honest truth answer of what I would do in that situation. And he even joked, he said, that's a great answer because he had actually interviewed at a job not too long before that where he was asked a technical question, did not know the answer, and his response was, I don't know. And the interviewer actually responded to him and said, you know, you could pull up Google, you could search, you could tell me how you would search. So I heard from him that that was a really good answer instead of saying, I don't know. Another strategy you can use is to explain or show tangential information that you know. So something that's not a direct answer to the question, you could say, I'm not entirely sure about that, but I do know about this. So that way you're at least demonstrating the knowledge you do have, especially if it's related to the topic of the question. I highly recommend that as well, because it just sounds a lot better than saying, I don't know. So that's just a couple of things I've learned through this process, just a couple bits of advice. And practicing is a good plan. Sometimes before I do interviews or before I have any sort of conference talk, speaking engagement, webinar, whatever it is, I'll jot down some bullet points, things I want to make sure I address. And then I'll just talk out loud to myself for a little bit. And I found for me, this actually helps. It helps me prime my brain for that kind of conversation so that it's fresh in my mind. Or I might even just read through those bullet points a few times if I'm not in a place where I can like talk out loud. But I found that that really helps me. It helps me come prepared with the right mindset, and it's easier for me to speak when I am asked questions. So I don't know, that might help people, it might not. Everyone's different and everyone has their own approach to things and things that help them. So it's good before an interview to identify where you struggle and then identify a plan of how to address that before the interview, whether or not it's nerves or building up some of that technical knowledge, brushing up on cybersecurity news. These are all really important things to just think about before you show up so that you're prepared. And all of those things, if you come prepared with all of that, you're going to like ace the interview. People notice when people come prepared with questions and are paying attention to the news. So that's my advice there. And then I also included this slide about building a resilient mindset, because as I mentioned, I was getting a lot of rejections and it was a bit overwhelming for me. I really kind of got to a point where I was like, what do I do to get through to these hiring managers? And my bit of advice about reaching out for the jobs that most excite you is definitely a great strategy. But like I said, that job I reached out to, I didn't end up getting that job. I was a finalist, but I didn't get the job, which was also, it was discouraging. But what I did is when I got that email after the final interview where they said they were going with a different candidate, I responded to that email and I asked, I said, well, do you have any feedback for me as I continue to search for other opportunities? And they responded and had some really great feedback for me. They listed out a couple topics that they thought I should maybe look into, a couple things to where I should build up my knowledge, because at that point I was just starting out. This was maybe, I don't know, 3 weeks into my job search. So it was pretty early on. And that feedback was really helpful to have that as I pursued other opportunities. And it also helped to build my confidence, to know that they thought I was a strong candidate. It wasn't exactly the right fit, but to know that I made it that far, it gave me the mindset that, yes, this is possible. I just need to find the right job. And all it takes is one job. You just have to find that one right opportunity to get your foot into the door. My next slide here is about careers in cybersecurity. So this is not an encompassing list. These are just some careers I jotted down when I was building these slides, things that come to mind for me right now. I mentioned Security Operations Center. This is where a lot of people get their start. I recommend when you're searching for jobs to search for maybe like a tier 3 SOC analyst position. Those are more junior. Even if it says 3 to 5 years experience, don't let that deter you. You still have a chance to apply for something like that, even if you don't have that much experience. Threat intelligence, that's what I do now. A lot of research, a lot of writing, staying on top of what's happening in the threat landscape. I love this area of focus because I love news and I love keeping up with what's happening in the world. I'm very interested in geopolitics, which plays a big role with threat intelligence as well. So that's another area. Threat hunting is a great area of focus. This is more proactive. So searching for indicators of compromise in your network that may not have been alerted on. There's also detection engineering, so building detections to alert on potential compromise. And then management, Chief Information Security Officer is an example of a leadership role at an executive level. It's a very tough job, but it's also a very important job. So that can be a future goal if you want to pursue a management role. And I know SANS actually offers leadership certifications as well, in addition to technical certifications. Red team, we talk about red team versus blue team. So red team is what Joseph does, the more offensive ethical hacking component, like pen testing, consultants. Blue team is the network defense. So your analysts. And then there's also different specializations, different niches you can pursue. So industrial control systems, I find very fascinating. Operational technology, think like SCADA systems, manufacturing plant networks. That's something that is definitely important. AI, machine learning, data science, these are hot topics right now. I'm sure you've seen a lot of news, especially with the onset of generative AI. I highly recommend at least brushing up on the basics of machine learning and understanding the way that these large language models function, and also some of the risks involved with using them. That's a big concern as someone working in this industry as well. And I bet that this will continue to be a big area of growth and learning potential and opportunities with jobs that emerge that are more focused on securing these models, and then also looking at the ways that they could potentially be exploited. That's a very early emerging area of focus, and I find it fascinating. Cloud security is also very important as more companies lift and shift into the cloud. Mobile, right? You probably get a lot of alerts on your phone about updating for the latest software updates. Um, and policy, we talked a little bit about GRC earlier today. There's also military, right? There's ways to serve your country while also building up your technical skills. There's a lot of opportunities. Like Joseph, he was in the US Army, so he was able to find resources as a veteran as well. Public sector, government, there's so many different specializations. So I just wanted to walk through some of those and just emphasize, in case you're kind of curious what different options are out there, if something is an area that you're already familiar with, especially with your own background. Like say you're a career changer like me, you might already have a specialization related to some of this that could then transfer. So just some thoughts as you start to begin your career journeys, or maybe you've already started and you're looking at your next role. But that is all I have. I know that there are some questions